Could you please give us your name?
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein.
It's 2018, and two men meet at Starbucks. One of them, who usually wears a sharp suit, is already sitting at the table. The other man goes to get them both some coffee. He looks like the complete opposite of the man across from him. He usually wears jeans or a sweater. His hair is gray, and his face is now lined with wrinkles. He seems nervous as he returns with the coffee. He seems to feel like he's being followed. Again and again, he glances at the parking lot in front of Starbucks, his eyes lingering on unfamiliar cars. Yet it's actually, presumably, this gray-haired man who usually hires people to keep an eye on others. The man in the suit has also been tailed by his people before. He's certain of that. But this meeting won't throw him off course. No matter what the gray-haired man offers him, he won't give up. He's promised that to himself and to his clients. Because this man is a lawyer who represents women who accuse the gray-haired man of terrible things. This man is Bradley J. Edwards, and he's sitting directly across from the very man he'll later call one of the worst sex offenders ever. This is episode 4 of our Epstein series, in which we examine the years between the end of Epstein's incarceration in 2009 and 2018, when the case once again came to public attention. For even though there were no legal consequences for him during this period, in retrospect, the 2000s and 10s were decisive years in this case. Several courageous women and a tenacious attorney ensured that the Epstein case garnered increasing attention, and above all, they likely caused Epstein himself to slowly realize that his house of cards was collapsing. The Crime Victims' Rights Act, CVRA, has been in effect in the United States since 2004. Under this law, victims of crime have the right to unrestricted contact with law enforcement agencies during the prosecution of the perpetrator. Although he was accused of dozens of counts of sexual assault, Epstein got off with a prison sentence of only 13 months. This is because he was never charged or convicted for the numerous cases of abuse. A plea deal with the district attorney's office at the time ensured that. Instead, Epstein pleaded guilty to soliciting prostitution and, in return, received his lenient prison sentence. For the many victims who had previously testified against him and recounted their experiences, this came as a shock. Especially, and this is the crux of the matter at the beginning of this episode, none of them were informed about this deal. This became apparent as early as May 2008, when a young woman named Courtney Wild contacted attorney Bradley Edwards. She had previously testified to the FBI as part of the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. Although investigators had promised to stay in touch with her, she hadn't been able to reach anyone for months. So she asked Brad Edwards for help, hoping he could assist her as her attorney in communicating with the authorities. When Edwards learned what had happened to Courtney at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein, he agreed to work for her pro bono. In retrospect, this is one of the most significant developments of all in the Jeffrey Epstein case. As Edwards begins to delve into the case, he quickly sees through the pyramid scheme behind Epstein's recruitment program. Consequently, Edwards is certain that the trial will proceed fairly straightforwardly and that Epstein will end up behind bars for a very long time. Even though the lack of communication between Courtney, as a victim, and the investigative authorities is very strange. Ultimately, however, any hope for a thorough investigation is dashed by the deal Epstein strikes with the prosecution. Because there will be no fair trial, the kind Epstein would have deserved under these circumstances. The victims are not informed of the details of the deal. They simply receive no information about their own case. Brad Edwards views this behind-closed-doors deal as a violation of the CVRA and files an emergency motion to block it. As we already know, to no avail. Edwards is furious about this deal and takes drastic measures. He decides to take legal action against both Jeffrey Epstein himself and the government to gain access to the details of the deal. However, this process drags on for months, as both Epstein and the government file objections. The non-prosecution agreement is not made public until after Epstein's lenient prison sentence has already ended. This means that only after Epstein is free again can the victims, their attorneys, and the public see details for the first time regarding the deal Epstein struck with the prosecution. The indictment, more than 50 pages long, which was actually already complete in 2007 to fully charge Epstein, will not be fully accessible to Brad Edwards as the victim's attorney until February 2026. To this day, Bradley Edwards and various victims are working to legally reopen the Epstein case. It's clear that Jeffrey Epstein doesn't appreciate this persistence. In 2009, he even sued Brad Edwards personally. Epstein took advantage of the fact that a former law firm partner of Edwards had previously committed a criminal offense. This partner was sentenced to a whopping 50 years in prison for running a so-called Ponzi scheme. In other words, a fraud in which high returns are promised, but these are not actually financed by business transactions, but rather by deposits from new investors. Epstein now alleges in a lawsuit that Brad Edwards helped his former partner in this scheme. Edwards is accused of lying about Epstein's abusive practices and of using lawsuits against Epstein to funnel more money into the law firm, and thus into the Ponzi scheme. According to Edwards, both he and his wife were under surveillance by Epstein's people at the time. Edwards, in turn, filed a lawsuit against Epstein for a malicious prosecution. He denies ever having had anything to do with his colleague's Ponzi scheme, and certainly did not intend to use the Epstein case for that purpose in any way. The whole affair dragged on for years, during which, according to Edwards, he was constantly being stalked. But he did not let it get him down, nor did the other victims. Even the investigators had Epstein back on their radar shortly after his release from prison. This time, however, it is members of the Drug Enforcement Administration. In 2010, the DEA investigates Epstein and others for unlawful wire transfers linked to illegal drugs, according to the documents. As part of this investigation, the agency examines, among other things, Epstein's personal and corporate finances, as well as records of private flights and international travel. The investigators focused in particular on New York and Epstein's private islands. However, the investigations in this regard dragged on for years, and many of the related documents remain heavily redacted even today. At the very least, information is available indicating that his banks alerted federal authorities at least 7 times between 2013 and 2015 to potentially suspicious transactions by Epstein. The total amount involved is approximately $5.7 million. As of now, the outcome of the investigation remains unclear. What is certain, however, is that no charges were filed against Epstein, Maxwell, or anyone else associated with the two as a result of this investigation. Meanwhile, the violation of the CVRA has still not been resolved. Just under 3 years after the deal, in the spring of 2010, 2 affected individuals filed a petition with the federal court. The plaintiffs accuse the government of violating their rights by failing to inform them about the deal with Epstein and by keeping it secret. Among other things, they want the settlement to be declared invalid. They accuse federal prosecutors of misleading them with false notification letters. Several women report that they received written confirmation from the authorities that the investigation into Epstein was still ongoing. It only came to light later that, at that time, a deal in Epstein's favor was already being negotiated. The prosecution, however, maintains that it was not obligated to notify the victims before reaching a non-prosecution agreement with Epstein. In September of that same year, however, the district judge rejected this claim. Meanwhile, Epstein himself attempted to polish up his image, not only in terms of his public relations, but also with regard to the justice system. After his conviction and release, he was required to register as a sex offender. According to the Miami Herald, espionage attempted to have his classification downgraded in 2011. However, this effort fails. He is registered at level 3, the highest and most dangerous level, which means there is a high risk of reoffending and a threat to public safety. This partial success coincides with another key moment in the Epstein case. In Part 2, we already discussed how Epstein tried to sweep all of this under the rug, and was quite successful at doing so. Presumably by intimidating victims, striking a shady out-of-court settlement involving monetary payments to victims, and attempting to censor media coverage of his schemes. As discussed in Episode 3, several victims accepted money and, in return, dropped their legal claims. What may seem incomprehensible to many at first glance is actually quite plausible if you try to put yourself in the victim's shoes. They witnessed firsthand how virtually all statements led to no legal consequences, and how victims were even systematically discredited. All of this is compounded by the fact that Epstein specifically sought out victims from socially disadvantaged backgrounds. Legal proceedings cost not only a great deal of energy, but also money. Interviews, testimony, and other related activities take up time during which one cannot work. Coping with that is difficult enough when financial resources and stability in life are scarce. And in the Epstein case, one is taking on a man with immeasurable resources and connections. For many victims, out-of-court settlements are therefore an unsatisfying but logical step. The fact that Epstein was even willing to pay money and prevent further legal action is, at least to some extent, something of an admission of guilt. Especially since many of the victims could really use the money and were thus able to find some kind of closure. Virginia Giuffre is among the women who accepted such an out-of-court payment from Epstein. In 2009, she received $500,000 from Epstein. In return, a lawsuit she had previously filed against him was dropped. At that time, her story was not yet known. This would remain the case for another 2 years until she decided to go public after all. In early 2010, she gave birth to a daughter, and this event marked a turning point for her. She wanted to speak out about what had happened to her because she refused to accept that perpetrators could be protected. Around the same time, a British tabloid journalist attempted to track down the then anonymous woman who had received a $500,000 settlement from Epstein in 2009. She and Virginia get in touch, and in early 2011, they have their first face-to-face conversation. As a British citizen, the journalist is particularly interested in one specific allegation made by Virginia, namely, that she had been forced to sleep with then Prince Andrew. On February 27, 2011, the first article about Virginia's allegations against Andrew was published in the Mail on Sunday. In it, she was revealed to be the anonymous complainant from 2009 and deliberately stepped into the public eye, thereby giving a face to the many victims for the first time. It was also the first time that the photo, which you've all surely come across in connection with the case, went viral. It shows a photo of Virginia and Prince Andrew, presumably taken by Jeffrey Epstein himself. The Ghislaine Maxwell is also visible in the picture. Later, Virginia was often accused of receiving $160,000 from the newspaper for her interview and the photo. In her biography, published posthumously in 2025, she makes it clear that she considered this a normal procedure. From that point on, she never accepted payment for another interview. In any case, Virginia's serious allegations, not only against Prince Andrew, but also, and above all, against Jeffrey Epstein, had been made public as of February 2011. Although the article focuses on the British connection, it addresses Virginia's claim that Epstein passed her on to several wealthy and influential men. She also recounts her recruitment by Ghislaine Maxwell. In doing so, she links not only Epstein, but also his partner to these crimes. Epstein himself did not comment on the allegations at the time. Ghislaine Maxwell, on the other hand, issued a statement through a spokeswoman in March 2011, denying all allegations. Nevertheless, as a result of the media coverage, the Epstein network once again came under the scrutiny of investigators. Also in March 2011, Virginia was interviewed by FBI agents at the U.S. consulate in her new home in Australia. Although the interview initially yielded no results, it marked the beginning of the end for Epstein's abuse network. More and more journalists are now taking an interest in the case, and survivors realize they are not alone. There are people like Virginia and Brad Edwards who are taking courageous steps forward, paving the way for more and more women who dare to tell their stories once again. According to his own statements from 2026, Brad Edwards will work with more than 200 women over the next few years who claim to have been abused by Jeffrey Epstein. In December 2014, Virginia founded the organization Victims Refuse Silence with the help of Edwards and his colleague Brittany Henderson. This organization is intended to help victims of human trafficking. Brad Edwards is currently pursuing a lawsuit alleging a violation of the CVRA. A new complaint was filed on December 30, 2014. This time, the complaint also names Ghislaine Maxwell. Virginia describes how Maxwell introduced her to Epstein under the pretext that she was to work for him as a massage therapist. In reality, however, Maxwell intended to prepare her to provide sexual favors. Virginia further describes how Maxwell recruited other young women for the same purpose. The allegations regarding her being passed on to other men also stand. Among others, Epstein allegedly passed her on to Prince Andrew and attorney Alan Dershowitz. Both Dershowitz and Prince Andrew deny her claims. On April 7th, federal judge Kenneth Mara ruled that Virginia could not join the CVRA lawsuit, as doing so would merely duplicate the existing subject matter of the case. In addition, the judge ruled that her affidavit be removed from the proceedings. In Alan Dershowitz's view, this cleared his name. It is worth noting, however, that Judge Kenneth Mara is not concerned with whether Virginia's allegations are true or false. For her central claim, they are simply irrelevant and inadmissible. Nevertheless, she can still be called as a witness. Maxwell and Epstein did, however, become very nervous when it briefly appeared that Virginia might be included in the proceedings. On January 12, 2015, Epstein sent an email to Maxwell in which he wrote that she could offer a reward to anyone in Virginia's extended circle who was willing to help prove her claim false. We're already familiar with this pattern of discrediting and intimidation. Virginia would later also describe how her home was broken into multiple times while she was away. In a statement from January 2015, Maxwell claimed that Virginia's allegations were not new and had already been refuted. They were obvious lies. But by portraying Virginia as a liar, Maxwell is shooting herself in the foot legally. For Virginia's lawyers, this provides an opportunity to sue Maxwell for defamation. And in a potential defamation lawsuit, Virginia could then also disclose the abuse she suffered at the hands of Maxwell and Epstein in court. After all, to prove that Maxwell defamed Virginia, the details of the case must be specified and substantiated. That is why a lawsuit was filed against Ghislaine Maxwell in September 2015. In addition, several civil lawsuits were filed that same year, alleging that Epstein and Maxwell had operated an international sex trafficking ring. From this point on, Epstein and Maxwell would no longer have any peace. Instead, they would be held accountable. In the defamation trial starting in 2016, not only will Virginia be questioned, but also many people in her circle. This includes her ex-boyfriend, with whom she was in a relationship while she was still traveling with Epstein and Maxwell. He confirms that during the relevant period, Virginia repeatedly traveled with Epstein and Maxwell for about 2 weeks each month. He further confirms that Virginia told him at the time that she had been forced to engage in sexual acts, among others, by Prince Andrew. Another key witness is a chef who worked for a couple who were friends with Epstein. He states that Epstein and Maxwell once brought a conspicuously young Swedish woman to a gathering who appeared frightened. Later, she told the chef through tears that she had been on Epstein's island with Maxwell and another woman, where Maxwell had taken her passport away. The adults there had tried to pressure her into engaging in intimate acts. This pattern of passport confiscation is something Virginia had previously described in her allegations as well. Ghislaine Maxwell herself was also questioned under oath in April 2016 regarding the allegations against her. However, she used her time to dissect every single question and respond with counter-questions. The questioning, including breaks, lasted over 10 hours, during which Maxwell denied the allegations. She was also asked why she remained in contact with Epstein at all after he was found guilty in 2008. Maxwell responded by explaining that she was a very loyal person and that Jeffrey had been very kind to her when her father died. She categorically rejects the allegations made by Virginia and Jeffrey. Among other things, she states, "I have never, at any time, on any occasion, and in any way, been involved in anything with Virginia and Jeffrey. And just to be clear, she is an absolute liar. I have never seen Jeffrey have sexual intercourse with anyone." She claims to have hired adult female massage therapists only occasionally, though not through conventional channels. During the questioning, Maxwell reportedly became so angry that she slammed her hand on the table in front of her. She is even said to have knocked a court reporter's computer off the table. There is a partial transcript from September 2016 of a questioning of Jeffrey Epstein. As far as can be gathered from the few articles on the subject, this questioning was part of Virginia Giuffre's lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell. However, you can probably already imagine what Epstein has to say. Virtually nothing. Unlike Maxwell, he limits himself to brief remarks. His answer to most questions is fifth. He is referring to the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. This is the constitutional amendment that protects people from incriminating themselves, so he doesn't deny anything. When asked whether it was customary for his former girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, to bring massage therapists to him so he could abuse them, he again simply says, fifth. He gives the same answer when asked whether Maxwell had recruited one of the women she hired for massages at the Mar-a-Lago resort. Virginia had previously described on several occasions how Ghislaine Maxwell had approached her there while she was working at the resort. Later, Maxwell's attorneys attempt to have the case dismissed, arguing that Virginia's complaint did not raise a valid issue in dispute. However, the presiding judge rejects this motion. A full trial in the case was actually scheduled to begin in May 2017, but it never takes place. Instead, both parties agree to a settlement, as a result of which the proceedings are dismissed by mutual consent. Virginia later explains why she settled for this outcome. Due to legal technicalities, the case was never about a potential criminal trial against Ghislaine Maxwell, but rather a civil proceeding. This means that even if Maxwell had been found guilty in a hypothetical trial, she would not have received a prison sentence, but rather a fine. She explains that she accepted the money not least because of her children. Due to her trauma and her public allegations, it was understandably difficult for Virginia to find work on the open job market. With the money from the settlement, however, she once again has financial security, not only for herself, but also for her 3 young children. And Virginia is by no means the only one confronting Epstein and Maxwell. In February 2016, attorney Brad Edwards met with his colleague J. Stanley Pottinger and U.S. Attorney Amanda Kramer, who specializes in human trafficking. Edwards and Pottinger urged her to launch an investigation into the allegations that Epstein was running a systematic abuse ring. Already at this meeting, the attorneys brought up the name Jean-Luc Brunel. According to a note Amanda Kramer took during that meeting, Brunel did indeed signal a willingness to cooperate with the authorities at the time. His attorneys, however, stated that their client would not be willing to meet. Edwards and Pottinger also told Kramer that some of the FBI agents involved in the investigations of the 2000s were very dissatisfied with how the investigations against Epstein had turned out. Edwards and Pottinger used this as an argument for initiating new proceedings. Kramer then tries to look into the matter with the FBI in Florida. She receives no response. According to a New York Times article, however, she does not try to follow up any further. Neither Amanda Kramer nor her superiors in the district attorney's office take any further investigative steps. In the meantime, however, something else entirely happens. Something that was on everyone's lips at the time, but is often forgotten today amid a mountain of other allegations. Now is the time to talk about Donald Trump. First off, there has been no conviction against Trump in connection with Jeffrey Epstein's activities. No legal proceedings ever took place. Nevertheless, this episode would not be complete if we did not discuss a lawsuit from 2016. In April 2016, a lawsuit was filed by a woman who is now known in the media as Katie Johnson. Katie Johnson's allegations implicate not only Jeffrey Epstein, but also Donald Trump. It is well known that the current president has been accused of abusive behavior on multiple occasions. However, all of the women involved so far have been of legal age, all except one, and that is Katie Johnson. The lawsuit was filed shortly before Trump was officially nominated as the Republican presidential candidate. It is also the only known lawsuit at the time of this report that is directed against both Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. Katie describes the incident as having taken place in 1994 at Epstein's New York mansion. Both Epstein and Trump were aware of her actual age. She came into contact with Epstein because he had promised her a modeling career. Katie Johnson describes how, instead of taking her to modeling castings, Epstein took her to parties where, among other people, she met Donald Trump. These incidents occurred multiple times between June and September 1994. In the complaint, Katie Johnson describes both how she was forced to engage in intimate acts with Trump and how she was coerced into performing such acts on another victim in front of him. There were 4 abusive encounters with the future president. She reports not only sexual acts, but also physical violence in the form of beatings. Her allegations regarding Epstein align with the pattern we already recognize from cases in the 2000s, a massage that escalates into an even more graphic assault. She describes 3 such assaults committed by Epstein. Both men told her that if she ever spoke about what had happened, both Katie Johnson herself and her family would be in grave danger. In her lawsuit, Katie Johnson is seeking $100 million in damages. According to the complaint, there is a female employee of Epstein who can corroborate Katie Johnson's account and would also testify in court. This witness is referred to anonymously in the documents as Tiffany Doe. At the time, Tiffany submitted an affidavit stating that, to the best of her knowledge, what Katie Johnson claims is the truth. According to the documents, Tiffany began working for Epstein in 1990. She organized several parties for him and, above all, ensured that attractive young women were invited. Tiffany describes how she met Katie Johnson in 1994. The young woman told her that she had come to New York with the dream of a modeling career. Tiffany then offered to take her to parties. She would be paid for her presence there and could also make contacts with people who would help her with her career. There is a written affidavit from Tiffany in which she states that she saw with her own eyes how Trump and Epstein abused Katie at one of these parties. Both men were also aware of Katie's age. Tiffany goes on to describe how she stopped working for Epstein in 2000 and was subsequently threatened that she and her family would be killed if she ever spoke out about what she had seen while working for Epstein. Tiffany's affidavit concludes with the words, "I swear to these facts under penalty of perjury, even though I fully understand that the life of myself and my family is now in grave danger." Katie Johnson's original lawsuit was dismissed fairly quickly due to a procedural error. Shortly thereafter, however, Johnson filed 2 additional lawsuits in New York. At that time, during the election campaign, the issue was, of course, discussed with particular intensity. Trump's lawyer at the time was quoted as saying, "That is categorically false. It is completely baseless. It is unfounded. It is irresponsible. I won't even address the merits of the case, because that would lend it a credibility it doesn't deserve." Epstein himself forwarded a reporter's request for comment on Katie Johnson's lawsuit in April 2016 to several people, including his attorney Alan Dershowitz and former White House legal counsel Catherine Rimmel. He also informed an advisor to the Trump campaign. Epstein sent a message to journalist Michael Wolff saying, "Here we go." Among others, Katie Johnson was represented by an attorney named Evan Goldman. He said his client had been intimidated and her cell phone had been hacked. That is why she decided at the last minute not to hold the press conference. He also argued that the addresses provided for the lawsuit in California were obviously fake. That's because the address where Katie Johnson was supposedly registered wasn't even a residential building. It was a parking lot. No one could be reached at the listed phone number either. Text messages went through, but calls did not. As a result, the courts were unable to serve any legal documents on Katie Johnson. Attorney Evan Goldman says this was a tactical move to protect his client. However, he also admits that he himself has never spoken to Katie Johnson in person. All contact has been handled through third parties. Even when a journalist calls the number, he only gets a male voice on the line who claims to work with Katie Johnson. The person, however, refuses to provide any further details. A press conference is scheduled for November 2016. Katie Johnson is set to appear publicly there alongside another attorney representing her, Lisa Bloom, and issue a statement. Lisa Bloom has represented other victims of Epstein. The press conference is set to take place just 6 days before the presidential election and generates so much interest that even the website of Lisa Bloom's law firm crashes. However, this press conference takes place without Katie Johnson. Instead, her attorney, Lisa Bloom, appears alone before the cameras. She explains that Katie, like many other victims, had received too many threats. However, a new date is never set. Shortly thereafter, Katie Johnson's lawsuits against Epstein and Trump are withdrawn. After the planned press conference, Katie Johnson disappears from the public eye. Her true identity, and whether Katie Johnson is her real name, remains unknown to this day. Especially after her sudden disappearance, the press has often speculated whether Katie Johnson, and by extension her allegations, ever actually existed. Specifically, it is suspected that a person named Norm Lubo is behind the story. Research supporting this theory comes primarily from the British newspaper The Guardian. The Guardian is considered a left-leaning media outlet and is likely to have little interest in defending Trump. Especially regarding Epstein, The Guardian has repeatedly reported critically on the matter, even during the period when allegations against Epstein were first made in the 2000s. This Norm Lubo later admitted to the online portal Snopes that he had been involved in Katie's lawsuit, particularly in making it public. The Snopes article concludes, Lubo's involvement does not disprove that Johnson is a real person. However, it shows that the allegations were aggressively promoted and supported by someone who has, on multiple occasions in the past, used people to fabricate fictional, scandalous stories. And that is a fact that both he and the plaintiff's attorneys have tried to downplay or obscure. However, Evan Goldman is not the only attorney Katie Johnson originally hired, aside from Lisa Bloom. A defense attorney named Jenny Mason also worked for Johnson, and unlike Goldman, he claims to have actually met and gotten to know Katie Johnson. According to an interview from October 2024, however, he knows neither why Johnson withdrew her lawsuit, nor whether she is even still alive today. Nevertheless, Jenny Mason says he personally has not the slightest doubt that Katie Johnson's version of events is the truth. Not only did he speak with her himself, but he also worked with several private investigators to verify her account. There is also a video circulating on YouTube that purports to show a filmed statement by Katie Johnson from November 2016. I cannot verify for you whether this video is authentic or not. However, what is recounted essentially matches Katie Johnson's original lawsuit and goes even further. 2 days after Trump's election victory, Epstein forwarded an article from the Daily Mail to several friends and acquaintances. The article discussed the withdrawal of Katie Johnson's lawsuit in federal court in New York. In 2026, when U.S. authorities released several documents related to the case, one of them documented the first report of Katie Johnson's abuse allegations. It is essentially an FBI report on the initial contact made by one of her attorneys. An article in Die Zeit states that editors downloaded the document from the official database on January 31st. According to the article, however, the document disappeared from the database a few days later. In response to the newspaper's inquiry, the Department of Justice claimed it had not deleted anything. On February 26th, the document was available again, so perhaps this was simply a matter of redacting personal information from the indictment at a later date, if necessary. Or this case raises the question of whether the Department of Justice was merely sloppy in its handling of the Epstein files, or whether the Trump administration is intentionally withholding material that could still pose a threat to the president, at least politically. In March 2026, the topic of Katie Johnson comes up again. Posts are circulating on social media claiming that Katie Johnson actually existed and was under investigation. She is said to have financially exploited an elderly person. Everything surrounding the Katie Johnson indictment remains quite mysterious to this day. But since the complaint was filed in connection with Epstein, it belongs in this video. It's also possible that the incidents, as described by Tiffany and Katie, never actually happened that way. As is well known, no charges were ever filed in this case. What remains are the case files and, above all, the statements made by the two women. When Trump was elected president, hardly anyone was talking anymore about the allegations against him and Epstein from April 2016. In February 2017, Trump appointed to his cabinet, of all people, someone we already know well from this video series, the former U.S. Attorney for Miami, Alexander Acosta. In the 2000s, he played a key role in negotiating the deal between Jeffrey Epstein and the prosecution. Now, he's set to become Secretary of Labor. During his confirmation hearing, he still has to address questions about the deal with Epstein. Apparently, he provides satisfactory answers to the relevant authorities. For Epstein himself, the net is slowly closing in as another woman files a civil lawsuit against Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and 3 alleged associates. Sarah Ransom. In the years prior, she had read about Virginia Giuffre's allegations in the press and had also inquired on her organization's Facebook page. Sarah finds that Virginia's statements partly reflect her own experience. That is why she decides to take legal action. In the lawsuit, Sarah describes how Epstein forced her to engage in sexual acts between 2006 and 2007 when she was in her early 20s. That is, at the time when Epstein was already under investigation in Palm Beach and had begun negotiating a deal with the district attorney's office. Originally, Epstein had wanted to hire her for so-called massages. In return, he promised her she could launch a career as a fashion designer. Ghislaine Maxwell showed her how to massage Epstein. However, Epstein assaulted her as early as the first massage. This happened dozens of times between 2006 and 2007. This occurred both at Epstein's home in New York and on his private island. Sarah also states that she was allowed to live with Epstein rent-free and was provided with a cell phone and a chauffeur service. She once tried to flee from Epstein's island. However, a search party assembled by Epstein quickly tracked her down and brought her back to the main house. In January 2007, she was reportedly sent on a trip to South Africa to recruit young models to bring back to Epstein. Sarah, however, refused to do so. In May 2007, she reportedly left the US, and thus Epstein and Maxwell, for good, and never returned. Furthermore, she states in this lawsuit that Epstein instructed her to become intimate with people in his inner circle, among others, with his lawyer, Alan Dershowitz. Sarah further alleges that Epstein and Maxwell threatened her with physical violence or the destruction of her career if she did not comply with his demands at his New York mansion and on his private Caribbean island. Similar to Virginia before her, she also describes how Epstein and Maxwell took her passport away. Just as with Virginia's allegations, Dershowitz also rejects Sarah Ransom's accusations. This is despite the fact that the documents mention that Epstein instructed her to have intimate relations with Dershowitz. Whether this actually happened remains unclear. Dershowitz, however, is very explicit in his response. He claims he does not even know Sarah Ransom and has never heard her name before. Dershowitz claims that Sarah Ransom's allegations were likely fabricated by her attorney, David Bowie, as an act of personal revenge against Dershowitz. Maxwell also rejects the allegations and moves to dismiss the charges. Jeffrey Epstein, however, once again agrees to an out-of-court settlement. "2017 is also the year of #MeToo, and that's a very important point in this case. Not because the movement has anything directly to do with Jeffrey Epstein, but because the still evolving, yet nonetheless growing, understanding that has emerged from the #MeToo era helps set the stage for what will come to a head in July 2019 with Jeffrey Epstein's arrest. But Epstein himself also notices that the way allegations of sexual violence are handled is changing. He even calls Brad Edwards to complain that Edwards' work is portraying him as even worse than Weinstein, against whom new allegations were emerging almost constantly at the time. Shortly afterward, one of Edwards' clients even tells him about an incident involving both Weinstein and Epstein. She had been in Paris with Epstein, where he told her to give a massage to a friend of his. That friend was Weinstein. Weinstein had made inappropriate advances during the massage. She says she then ran out of the room and told Epstein what had happened. Epstein then actually kicked Weinstein out of the house. Edwards, in turn, later confronted Epstein with this story. Epstein admitted it, but portrayed himself as the good guy. This story, he claimed, was proof that he wasn't nearly as bad as Weinstein. After all, he had protected the woman from Weinstein in that situation. It apparently didn't occur to him that the woman wouldn't have been in that situation in the first place if it weren't for Epstein. This was also the period during which Edwards and Epstein met at Starbucks, even though, or perhaps precisely because, Epstein and Edwards were still embroiled in legal disputes at the time. The whole thing dragged on for years. Apparently, Epstein didn't expect Brad Edwards to remain so steadfast. Edwards reports that at some point, Epstein asked him to stop communicating through lawyers and to meet in person instead. So he met with the perpetrator several times at Starbucks. And during those meetings, Epstein apparently tried to convince Brad Edwards that the whole case wasn't really that dramatic after all. Epstein told him that the idea that consensual sexual intercourse could only take place at age 18 was redundant. Edwards, of course, did not agree. At the same time, Epstein hinted to the attorney that he could cause significant damage to his personal life if he did not stop pursuing criminal charges against him. During this meeting, Epstein also repeatedly made it clear to him that Edwards need only name a sum of money he wanted. According to Edwards, it seemed as though Epstein was willing to pay any amount he desired as long as he stopped representing the women involved. After all, that's how it had walked for him in the past. I can't even give you an exact number of women here who, over the course of the 2000s and 2010s, first filed lawsuits against Epstein and then settled with him out of court. The documentation on this is very confusing. It could be a handful, it could be dozens, or even more. However, as a renowned attorney, Brad Edwards is in a different position than the women whom Epstein abused. He not only has the necessary resilience, but above all, the means to stand his ground. He wants Epstein to at least withdraw the allegations he made against Edwards personally, and, hard as it may be to believe, that is exactly what happens. After about 10 years of legal battles, Epstein calls off court dates that had already been scheduled and agrees to withdraw his lawsuit. Epstein publicly admits that he tried to put Brad Edwards under public pressure with false allegations. The claim about involvement in the Ponzi scheme was completely fabricated. Epstein's full statement on this matter reads as follows. While Mr. Edwards was representing clients against me, I filed a lawsuit against him in which I made allegations against him that, as the evidence clearly shows, have proven to be completely false. In reality, his aggressive investigative and litigation style was extremely effective and therefore posed a problem for me. The lawsuit I filed was my unreasonable attempt to damage his professional reputation and persuade Mr. Edwards to stop pursuing cases against me. It did not work. Despite my efforts, he continued to do an excellent job for his clients and held me accountable through his tireless efforts. I now admit that I was wrong, and that the things I said to damage Mr. Edwards' reputation as a trial attorney were false. I sincerely apologize for the false and hurtful accusations I made and hope for forgiveness for my admission of wrongdoing. Jeffrey Epstein certainly did not like putting his signature under these words, but he did so. Of course, one can only speculate at this point, but the crux of the matter was that Epstein claimed Edwards had represented alleged victims solely to make money. What's likely crucial here is that this was, in fact, very much about Epstein's victims. Because to prove that Edwards did not represent the women for the money, but because he is certain that Epstein is a serial offender, the victims would have had their first real chance here to speak in court about the allegations against Epstein and to make their accusations public in a legal context. It wasn't until shortly before the trial was set to begin that Epstein caved in and issued this apology. It seems as though it was the lesser of two evils to expose himself as a liar rather than wait to hear what the victims might say in court. Nevertheless, even at this point, around 2017 and 2018, Epstein still did not seem to realize how close his ultimate downfall already was. And yet, he was even given a warning. A woman named Julie K. Brown reached out to Epstein's lawyers. She was a journalist for a local Miami newspaper and had been investigating her client's criminal past since 2016. No one really took her seriously, precisely because she was just a small-town reporter. But Julie was onto something incredibly big, something that would change the entire case. In the next video in this series, we'll talk in detail about how Julie Brown, in a sense, made it possible for the investigation into Epstein to resume, and on such a scale that he was arrested in July 2019. So in part 5 of the series, we'll look at the period from the turning point Julie initiated up to Jeffrey Epstein's death. I really hope you'll watch that part again. That's all for today. One thing I'm still curious about. Do you think Katie Johnson really existed, or was she a figment of someone's imagination? Feel free to let me know in the comments. I hope you found this video informative. If so, please leave a like or a comment. That really helps the channel a lot. Other than that, there isn't much more to say. I wish you a good morning, afternoon, or evening, whichever time you're watching this, and hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, ciao everyone.